Welcome to the latest installment of Fireside Bible Stories. We are picking up where we left off last week with our trip through the book of Judges. Last week we ended with the story of Ehud the left-handed killing the king of the Moabites, who had subdued the Israelites and treated them very badly. And we saw that there is kind of a cycle of a great hero of the faith being raised up by God among the Israelite people and rescuing them from oppression and subjugation, only for them to forget who they are and fall right back into the same pattern. So that is where we pick up tonight. Moses was in hiding. He was royalty, but he'd killed one of Pharaoh's men. He'd killed him for beating a Hebrew slave, no less, and he needed a place to hide and start over. And what better place than a backwater shepherd community like Midian? No one would ever think to look for Egyptian royalty out here in the sticks. It was rough at first getting used to this pastoral lifestyle. The smell of the sheep. And did they ever stop bleeding? But there was one bright spot. Jethro, the Midianite's daughters. Moses made it a point to be at the watering hole every day when Jethro's daughters were there, drawing water for their sheep. He'd always gone for the more traditional Egyptian aristocratic types, but there was something about these shepherdesses that he found strangely appealing. He got along with Jethro pretty well too, so that was a nice bonus. And Jethro seemed to know quite a bit about the Israelite God. He called himself a priest. Perhaps this Jethro has a lot more to offer someone like Moses than he previously thought. Well, Moses ended up eventually marrying one of Jethro's daughters, Zipporah. And he was content to settle right there in Midian and retire as a gentleman farmer. Sure, he wanted to see the people in Egypt again, both his Hebrew family that he had just begun coming to know, but also his Egyptian family that he'd been raised with. Some of them anyway. But he was happy here in Midian. He was happy with Zipporah. And why mess with success? Moses protected his life in Midian. He had no desire to go back to Egypt now. He was in charge of all of his flocks and all of his father-in-laws. And that was pretty lucrative. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but he was happy. One day he was tending the flocks, and they wandered out into the wilderness near Mount Horeb. Suddenly there was a brilliant flash of light and a booming voice beckoning him to remove his shoes because he was on holy, sacred ground. Everything was about to change. When Moses and his brother Aaron led the Hebrews out of Egypt and across the Red Sea, Jethro's Kenite tribe of Midianites followed. Jethro even became one of the priests of Yahweh with the Israelite congregation. When the promised land was divided up among the tribes of Israel, the Kenites were given an allotment of land near Jericho, where they lived for many years. But eventually, a section of the Kenite tribe moved south. The Kenites always remained friendly with Israel for the most part. And God always treated the descendants of Moses' father-in-law very well, even in instances of conflicted loyalties, even when the Kenites made an alliance with a nation who became hostile to Israel. Ehud had freed the people of Israel from the oppression of the Moabites over 80 years ago, but Israel had a short memory. It wasn't long before they were chasing after foreign gods and idols again, and once again, just like they had time and time before, the Israelites found themselves being subjugated by a foreign power again. This time it was the Canaanites, ruled by King Jabin. King Jabin of Hazor was bad. But the worst part of the current state of the oppression of the Israelites was living in the care of Jabin's general Sisera. Sisera came from a town called Harosheth Hagoyim, or Harosheth of the pagan nations. Sisera oversaw the Israelites with an iron fist, and the oppression was more than the people could bear. Isn't it amazing how quickly Israel remembers God's might and power when they need it? The people cried out to God, but his response was not immediate. There was a judge over Israel at the time of King Jabin and General Sisera. Besides divine wisdom to judge over and lead the people of Israel, God had also granted this judge an amazing prophetic ability. Deborah lived in the Ephraimite hill country and held court under the date palm trees of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel. She very often pronounced judgment over Israel for their idolatry. Every day the people would gather hoping for a word of hope from Deborah, maybe an end to this oppression that they were living under. They needed something. But every day it was the same fire and brimstone judgment. But one day she told the people to summon Barak from the tribe of Naphtali. The people wondered what she could possibly want with him, but they complied. Barak was summoned, and he nervously appeared before Deborah. Barak, God has spoken to you, hasn't he? Barak got very nervous. How did she know that? Deborah continued, you're going to take the army of Israel and face Sisera's army. Barak got even more nervous. He said, how can that be? Sisera has 900 chariots. Just a few dozen iron chariots would rout any army, but he has 900. And oh, by the way, we don't have an army. Deborah coolly replied, the Lord God says that you will take 10,000 men from Naphtali and Zebulun and ambush Sisera at Mount Tabor. God will draw Sisera out there, and you will take him at the Wadi Kashan. Deborah said this with such confidence and authority. What was really unnerving is that she was right. He thought that God had been telling him to do something like this. He knew that this was coming. Deborah possessed a leadership style that could only be described as divine. Barak had never encountered a leader, man or woman, that was such a natural and inspiring leader. I'll do it. Barak paused. And he said, as long as you go too. If I'm going to go into battle, I want the assurance of the prophetess and judge of Israel with me. As long as you're there, Deborah, we'll be victorious. Deborah immediately launched into a tirade, and she said, you fool, it's God that makes you victorious, not me. I'll go, but not as some good luck charm. I'm going to go because I have no doubt that God is going to use you to destroy our enemies, and I want to see the look on their faces when it happens. But because of your cowardice and because of your misguided faith, you will not receive the glory for killing Sisera. That glory will go to a woman. That stung. Barak had nothing but respect for Deborah, but did she really plan to take credit for everything that was about to happen? It seemed a little petty, but still she was right. Barak felt that God was directing him to do this, and he was going to trust that Deborah, and maybe partly God, would see him through. He had to do this. It was a battle that would have made Hannibal Smith of the A-Team proud. The whole plan came together beautifully, and the Canaanites were routed. The chariots were neutralized right off the bat. And by the time the day was finished, the Israelites had suffered very few casualties, but every member of the army of Harosheth Hagoyim lay dead. Deborah had told them to prepare for battle that morning, and that the Lord would go before them and break the Canaanites. She was right. The chariots were destroyed, and all the soldiers were dead, except one. Sisera, the fearsome general, had abandoned his chariot and run when he saw the horde of 10,000 Israelite troops swarming down Mount Tabor, led by Barak. Interesting that Barak's name means a flash of lightning, because that's how quickly he destroyed the Canaanite army. He lived up to his name that day. And as Sisera was fleeing, Barak caught sight of him running, but in all the confusion of the battle, he lost track of him, and he'd gotten away. After the rout was over, Barak sent trackers to find Sisera. He couldn't have gotten far. Sisera knew that there was a tribe close by that was allied with King Jabin. They were the people of Heber the Kenite. Heber was the leader of a group of Kenites that had moved south from their settlement near Jericho many years before. The Kenites and the Canaanites had a tenuous peace, and Sisera thought to go there and try and find refuge. Almost immediately after entering Heber's land, he spotted the wife of Heber, Yael. Sisera threw himself at Yael's mercy, pleading for help. She gently reassured him and offered to hide him in her tent. Yael recognized Sisera right away as the great general of the army of Harosheth Hagoyim, but she patiently listened as he explained himself. And the safer he felt, the more bravely he asserted himself, and the peace between King Jabin and the Kenites. Yael continued to reassure him as she made him comfortable in her tent. She laid him down to rest and covered him with blankets, partly to comfort him, but partly to hide him, just in case any Israelite trackers came snooping around. To calm his nerves, Sisera asked for something strong to drink. Yael complied, but she brought him warm milk to help him sleep. Not exactly what he'd wanted, but it'll do. And after his milk and a soothing bedtime story, she tucked the little general in and left him to sleep before stepping outside. Sisera was sleeping like the dead when Yael re-entered the tent with her hands full. She tiptoed over to Sisera's sleeping body and sat down next to him. She positioned the tent stake that she had in her left hand delicately on Sisera's temple. Then she produced the mallet that she had in her right hand to drive the divine justice of God through Sisera's evil head. She struck the tent stake with such force that it drove through his skull and pinned him to the ground. Sisera's body let out a sickening shudder assumed that he was dead. He never knew what hit him. Yael left him there like that for the night. At first light the next morning, some Israelite trackers had made their way to Yael's area. She hailed them, telling them that she might have something that they're going to want to see. Barak just happened to be in that very tracking party, and they made their way to Yael's tent. She said, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you were seeking." And it suddenly dawned on Barak that it wasn't Deborah that was going to steal his glory. A woman had killed Sisera and would rightly receive the honor and the glory for it. Sometime after the battle, Deborah wrote a psalm of praise to God to tell the tale of the end of the reign of King Jabin and the torment and oppression of his general Sisera. She sang the praises of all that followed the commands of God, of Barak for leading the fight, of the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun for winning the battle, and even for Deborah herself for being the conduit of God. But the star of the song was someone seemingly insignificant up until that point. In the song of Deborah, she sings the praises of Yael. She says, "Most blessed of all women be Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed. He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a lordly bowl. She put her hand on the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's mallet. And she struck Sisera a blow, and she crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. He sank and fell. He lay still at her feet. At her feet he sank and fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead." The descendants of the Midianites had come to the aid of Israel. But will the ancient familial alliance forged by Moses and Jethro so many generations ago stand the test of time? Find out next week as we continue through the story of Israel in the period of the Judges.